Another week of monumental change, the push to cut the police budget. But what would that mean for Kansas City's escalating crime rate? Also this half hour, what were we doing this time last year? That's right, picking a new mayor. Exactly a year after the mayoral election, a report card on the man who won. Plus, Missouri drops all social distancing requirements, and KU cancels spring break. All ahead on Week in Review.
Week in Review is made possible through the generous support of Dave and Jamie Cummings, Bob and Marlise Gorley, Smithfield Foods, Haas and Wilkerson Insurance, the Courtney S. Turner Charitable Trust, John H. Mize and Bank of America N.A. co-trustees, and by viewers like you. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Nick Haynes, and thank you for joining us in what has been another extraordinary week of change here in our metro, connecting the dots on the most impactful stories happening where we live. Senior writer for the Call newspaper, Eric Wesson. From the pages of the Kansas City Star, Dave Helling. Covering City Hall for KCUR News, Lisa Rodriguez. And tracking the week's top stories from behind a microphone at KCMO Talk Radio, Pete Mundo. You've been hearing talk about defunding police departments around the country. Is that about to happen here? Well, it may, not because of protests, but because of the pandemic. Around 200 positions in the Kansas City Police Department may have to be slashed as part of across-the-board cuts being demanded by the city. That's 1 in 10 jobs in the KCPD. Usually, when cuts like these are proposed, they are fiercely fought. Does the protest movement make it much easier for city council members to greenlight these cuts, Eric Wesson?
Yes, it does. There's a mentality that these things need to be done, and the police department needs to do some reform. The budget, as we all know, is going to be a catastrophe for the next year, maybe even 2 years, with there not being the sales tax revenue or all of the things that are needed to make the city functional. And so this is right now is the easy exit for them to say, we're going to take money from the police department. Because right now, the police department is public enemy number one in the Black community. So it's really easy for them to do that now.
But some council members are skeptical, Lisa. I saw Eric Bunch saying, well, earlier this year, it was if we added $10 million to the police budget, that meant 10 extra officers. Now we're talking about $10 million in cuts. That's 200 jobs that are going to be lost. He's puzzled by that math.
Right. The math doesn't add up, and I'm not sure that we have a clear answer for that right now. But I think the police department wants to hang on to every dollar they can get, and I think that they know that this is a time where there is momentum behind these council members and behind these decisions.
Some worried, though, Pete Mundo, that what happens if we do start reducing the police department? What does that mean to a crime rate that is already going through the roof in Kansas City?
Yeah, we're up, 38% year over year in terms of homicides in Kansas City. So the notion that reducing that makes a lot of sense or will accomplish the intended goal, I've seen no evidence to point to on that.
We need to be clear a little bit that these proposed cuts for the police department, Nick, are part of a broader problem at City Hall. And it's really just an exercise in which the city manager said, hey, look, to every department, if we have to cut you 4.5%, what's that going to look like? Now, in Kansas City, of course, like most cities, that means the most at the police department because it's the single largest expenditure of any department at City Hall.
Eric, there is concern, given the protests, that police are already disengaging. They're not enforcing in the same way they did in the past. Is there really any evidence of that?
The city council put the heat on them with the tear gas and how they were engaging and pretty much fighting with the general public. So I believe they backed off and they got good results. There wasn't as much confrontation between the community and the police department. So them changing the approach on how they dealt with the general public, I think that helped a lot.
Now, local protests, though, did move outside of police headquarters this week, where demonstrators chanted, hey, hey, ho, ho, Chief Rick Smith has got to go. And the ad hoc group against crime now joining 3 civil rights organizations calling for him to resign. Is there any evidence, though, that this growing unrest will lead to the police chief's departure, Lisa?
You know, I'm not sure. Throughout this whole process, Mayor Quinton Lucas has defended the actions of his chief, has not indicated that he is ready to get rid of him at this point. and despite, proposing, these reforms, has sent letters of support to his police department. So at this moment, I'm not sure that there's that energy there from the mayor.
Pete, you actually had the police chief on your program just in the last few days. What is he saying to defend himself?
He feels like the support is there from the board and including the mayor, as Lisa pointed out. But to the point of whether or not he's on thin ice, no matter how loud those calls get, I see no evidence that a change is coming in the near future on that.
What were we doing a year ago this week? Well, we were picking a new leader. We had just hosted the final debate, and you were heading to the polls to decide if you wanted Jolie Justice or Quinton Lucas to be our next mayor. How time flies.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
We didn't get the outcome we wanted tonight.
What an amazing night in Kansas City.
A year on, is Quinton Lucas delivering on his promises, Dave Helling?
Well, how things change, Nick, in a year. I mean, if anyone had coronavirus and, civic disturbances on their bingo card, let me know, because I don't think anyone could have planned for it. In fact, when we talked at the first of the year, you'll remember that the big goals for Mayor Lucas were reduce the number of homicides, which of course is still an issue, and free bus service, which has really been pushed to the back of the line because of the financial problems. But I do think the mayor is getting pretty high marks in Kansas City for his response to both crises on the fly. Again, you can plan for things, and then God has a way of laughing at your plans. And I think basically, if you talk to people around Kansas City, they think the mayor has been focused. He's been around. He's been visible. He's done interviews with us, Pete Show, everyone else, KCUR. He's talked about the problems he confronts, and again has taken what most people believe to be reasonable steps to confront both issues. So I think a year later, people are still relatively happy with Mayor Lucas.
Is handling the COVID crisis and handling then this current protests, that is his greatest accomplishment thus far, Eric Wesson?
Pretty much. And he's gone from one fire after the other. First, it was the homicides, then it was the housing issue and lack of affordable housing. Then we came with the virus and now the protests. He's handled them well. There are some eyebrows raised in the Black community about opening things up, and it seemed like it was more of an economic issue than it was public safety. Some of the business owners were kind of upset with him about the way he shut their businesses down and how he defined what was essential businesses and not. That was kind of an eyebrow raiser, especially among barbershops and beauty shops. But I think they've kind of kissed and made up and moved on. But he's handled these crises extremely well. And like Dave said, who could say, well, I want to have a crisis here. We're going to have some issues here with civil unrest. So he's handled it pretty well.
Well, Pete, what has been his greatest shortcoming then?
Well, you got to look at the homicides, even though in fairness, and I said this when he was elected, you can't judge him on that in a year or even 2 years. I mean, that's a full term before you judge somebody's success on violent crime. That being said, when you're on pace for a record and you're up 38% year to date, and it was part of what you ran on, and now you've got this divide between the mayor's office, the police chief, the department, the boots on the ground, it's creating a very unstable situation for the next 6 months, and nobody wants to have that on his resume. So it's not entirely fair, but when you run on that as a big issue, it is fair to bring it up.
Lisa Rodriguez, the mayor's biggest shortcoming?
I think I have to agree that he hasn't made the strides on public safety and reducing crime that he wanted to. I also think that the jury is still out on his stance on economic development. I think we have still seen spending and incentives granted for companies crossing state line, whether they were grandfathered in or whether they were projects that previous council had proposed. But there hasn't been a strong change in stance on that I have seen.
Dave.
Yeah. When the mayor took office, Nick, the biggest concern about his performance was his propensity to say one thing to one group and then to say something to another group, or the criticism that the last person to talk with the mayor usually got his or her way. And I think you can still hear whispers of that. There was some controversy about his letter to the police department, and then his, marching with the protesters a couple of weeks ago. And people are sort of saying the mayor is too fond of triangulating, if you will, between conflicting sides. And so that's going to be an issue going forward, particularly, Nick, I must say, over the next 6 months when these budget problems will reach a crisis situation. I mean, the city has never really faced the kind of financial crunch that it's facing now. And so the mayor is going to have, as I call it, a theory of the case. And there is some concern that he's trying to make everyone happy, and that's just not possible.
Eric.
And Dave is exactly right. Get on one side of the street and stay there. Don't keep going back and forth, and don't try to walk down the middle. And that is still a criticism that people have. He's marching with the Black Lives Matter, then he's writing a love letter to the police department. Which side of the street are you going to be on? And I think that's something that he's going to have to decide what he's going to do.
We just saw video, by the way, of Jolie Justice. Again, that was a year ago. I mean, Lisa, you were axe throwing with Jolie Justice to try and get a better sense of her about a year ago. Whatever happened to her? Has she left the political scene completely?
I mean, she's kept an incredibly low profile. I don't think that we've seen much from Jolie on Twitter, on social media, except for the occasional dog picture. So she may still be throwing axes out there somewhere, but not with me anymore.
Now, this week, Missouri dropped all of its state local social distancing requirements.
Missouri will be fully open for business in the entire state of Missouri. Local officials will still have the ability to further measure or regulate in places, but from a statewide stance, all restrictions will be lifted.
Now, that means there are no longer any limitations on how many people can be in a business or gather outdoors, given that local governments, as the governor points out, like Kansas City, can still impose their own restrictions. What difference did the governor's decision make where we live? Dave?
Well, I think like most states, the overall picture in Missouri is improving in terms of COVID, but it is not where anyone wants it to be. I tweeted this out last week, but there have been in Missouri more COVID deaths in 3 months than there have been traffic fatalities in all of 2019. So the crisis has not gone away. And you can sense some nervousness around the state and the country that the relaxation, if you will, the reopening, whatever you want to call it, has not gone as smoothly as a lot of people would hope, and that we're facing another challenge from COVID, not only this summer, but certainly next fall. So the jury remains out on that. But the political pressure on the governor to do what he did was immense, and we're going to live with the consequences.
Even Mayor Quinton Lucas, though, this week saying, Pete, that even if we have more hospitalizations, more deaths, he cannot picture having another shutdown like we experienced in the spring.
Well, I mean, nor should he. The state of Missouri has seen a decrease of hospitalizations of COVID, cutting about half from almost 1,000 in early May to about 500 right now. You've got 2,200 ventilators available in the state. You've got 60 people in the state on those ventilators for COVID in particular. So the original plan of, hey, we don't want to overwhelm this health system, whether it's in the state or the city, has been accomplished. It doesn't mean that we want to be going to concerts at the Sprint Center anytime soon, but 50% for Kansas City, Missouri is more than reasonable. And based on what we're seeing in other parts of the state, the governor made the right call while also giving local control. So to Dave's point, he politically had to do it, but also the numbers and the trend lines are certainly backing up that decision.
It's been a week of monumental change. Literally, on the other side of the state in St. Louis, a 140-year-old statue of Christopher Columbus was removed from a public park. In Kansas City, the Parks Board held its first public hearing on whether to erase the name J.C. Nichols from one of the city's most iconic landmarks. Nichols was a pioneering developer who also pioneered racial covenants that blocked people of color from living in his housing developments. Meanwhile, Kansas City police investigating vandalism at an historic memorial to to a lynching victim. It had been removed and thrown over a cliff. Now, we spent a lot of time talking about monuments on our last program, but with a new week comes new developments. Almost every major business group now coming forward to support erasing Nichols' name from the fountain. That, even before the public even got a chance to weigh in. How much influence will that have on the final outcome, Lisa?
I think the fact that major businesses have thrown their support behind this movement, I think now feels like the time where they might actually get this accomplished. But there has been some pushback as well from other groups that say they don't want to rename J.C. Nichols the street there, that's too small an homage to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.
And that's the Southern Baptist Leadership Council, Eric, who is saying, yeah, it's too minuscule. We don't want something that's just a half-mile long to name after Dr. King. We want something much, much larger. But I have to point out, on last week's program, you said even by the time we do this program this week, they may have already renamed the J.C. Nichols Fountain. That hasn't happened yet.
Yeah, but it's coming. It has overwhelming ground support for the change. But I think the issue will be, what do they name it? As far as the Nichols Parkway, the ministers, again, as I said last week, they wanted something more on the east side that our young people could drive down the street and see, more so something over in the plaza area where a lot of our young people don't go. So it's going to be an interesting battle on how that comes into play.
Can this push be stopped at this point, Pete?
If people in the community who are supposed to want that name on a prominent road or place don't like it, then yeah, I mean, if it's not sufficient to a large part of people that is supposed to matter to and have a big impact on, then it sounds like it's absolutely open for more debate.
Now, by the way, you can still weigh in with your view. The Parks Board is holding another meeting to discuss this issue this upcoming Wednesday at 2 p.m. It is a virtual meeting. You can find the details at kcparks.org. Many of you are also calling and emailing us. We heard from Jasmine this week, who writes, will we have failed if it's only the symbols that change? And from Alvin, will white Kansas City lose interest in this entire protest movement if they have to make real sacrifices to make equality happen? How can we best respond to those viewers, Dave?
Well, there is some truth in it, Nick. I mean, I wrote a column this week suggesting that Patrick Mahomes might want to become involved in the tomahawk chop controversy based on his appearance in this NFL video. And I got all kinds of emails. Believe me, people are really fond of the chop. And there were some writers who said, look, it's just about symbols. It's not about reality. And there's some truth to that. So I think, symbolism is a first step. Let's change the way we think. And then we can change the way we approach important things like housing, like development on the east side, like police department practices and policies when they engage in minority suspects. So this is not wasted time or wasted energy. It will be wasted if we don't go beyond the symbols at some point.
But back to Alvin's point, Eric, which is that if white Kansas City is not making any sacrifices but just changing symbols, there is very little that has changed in their lives. But would they really have the appetite for more systemic change? Like, again, what happens in our school districts? For instance, changing zoning laws to allow more affordable homes in some of these suburban school districts that allow other people to come in, for instance.
We can make our mouths say anything, but what are we going to change? Symbolic changing the street signs and building names, those things are good. They look good, they sound good, but it's like Dave said, it's the way people think. Change all the way. Let's not just talk about change. Let's be change. And I can talk about
and I think Mayor Quinton Lucas would say this is more than just symbols, Lisa. He is trying to make more systemic changes in issues like affordable housing and also in the criminal justice system. And I see a new proposal this week that would remove all arrests, for instance, from marijuana convictions, when more than 4 times as many African Americans are arrested for possession than whites are.
That's something that he had promised even when he was, campaigning for mayor. And it's paired with a separate kind of wider review of all of the city's codes to eliminate things like a warrant for failure to pay a fine or failure to appear in court, which unfairly target, poor working folks that maybe can't make that happen.
Pete.
Of the issue.
Well, let me just say, I know Dave probably got a lot of feedback on his Tomahawk Chop article, and Dave, you had my blood boiling on that one. I'm sure you can imagine. But
I do what I can. I do what I can, Pete.
It's more to point out we all want change. How we get about that change, I'm sure we all differ on in some capacity.
Right. If you spend too much time on these issues, then you will have failed. If a year from now, for example, the Kansas City Police Department is still controlled by the state, that's going to be a problem that is bigger than maybe, say, the Tomahawk Chop or other things.
And finally, some people may say it's a premature decision, but KU is already cancelling next year's spring break. It's one of several major changes the university is making to try and safely bring back students to campus. Students will not come back after the Thanksgiving holiday and will instead begin an extended winter break that won't see classes resume until February. The question many students and their parents are asking this week is, does less in-person class time translate to deep discounts in tuition fees, Pete?
Oh, of course not. I mean, these colleges are bleeding money. I mean, Nick, they are really going to be hurting here, especially if you factor in the fact that there could be no college football. What's going to go on there? That funds the entire athletic department many times over. These colleges are in for a heap of trouble. And don't forget the angle of, if people go to virtual learning, which some schools are for the fall semester, people don't see the value anymore in doing this and spending all this money to be behind a computer to learn. Do people continue that four-year education? Do they look at things like trade schools or two-year degrees, associate's degrees? That can have a major impact on the big business of four-year colleges. And don't kid yourself, it is big business.
It's one thing to keep tuition the same, but what are we to make then of the University of Missouri deciding this week, Lisa, that actually they're going to raise tuition, or they're asking to do that?
Yeah, I think that's a really, it'll be, I mean, obviously a really unpopular move, but I mean, it looks like the university passing on their costs to students and parents who are also very likely struggling economically in the same way that businesses are. We're all feeling the pain here. And I just think that it's optically, it's not a good look.
Now, when we put a program like this together every week, we can't get to every story making the headlines. What was the big story we missed?
Today's a good day.
Kansas and Missouri decline to act. Now the Supreme Court steps in to protect gay, lesbian and transgender workers from job discrimination. The protest movement now heading to the front door of suburban school districts in a demand for more diverse teachers and administrators. The fight over COVID cash continues. Kansas City says it still hasn't seen any money from Jackson County. Did you get Friday off to mark the end of slavery? Scores of Kansas City companies joining a national wave to make Juneteenth a paid holiday. These, by the way, are scenes from last year's Juneteenth celebration at 18th and Vine. Should you be arrested for possessing marijuana? The Kansas City mayor says no. He's introduced a new ordinance stripping pot possession from city codes. He says blacks are 4 times more likely to be arrested for marijuana possession, despite roughly equal usage rates to whites. We may be as far away from the ocean as you can be, but that is not stopping Kansas City from getting its own naval ship. The USS Kansas City officially joins the Navy this weekend. With no room on the Missouri River, the ship will home port in San Diego. The Negro Leagues Baseball Museum and the American Jazz Museum are back open to visitors. Both have been shuttered since March. And Worlds of Fun reopens Monday, but will it be hard to ride a roller coaster in a face mask? All righty. Did you pick one of those stories or something completely different, Dave Helling?
The University of Missouri, Kansas City is furious at a plan by the Missouri Board of Curators to combine the jobs of Chancellor of Missouri and Columbia with system president, which UMKC is part of. They think that makes UMKC a second-class university in the system. They're fighting it. They may lose the battle. That's my top story.
Well, I thought that was interesting because they said that would be the equivalent of the President of the United States also being the governor of California. Is that really an equal comparison?
Yes, because the chancellors have responsibility for each campus. The president is supposed to oversee all 4 campuses, Nick. And in combining 2 of them, the other left out campuses are going to feel like they're getting second-class treatment.
Eric Wesson, what was the big story we missed?
The new task force on policy safety that the mayor appointed, trying to figure out what this task force is going to do, that the other 19 haven't done. And when they implement these programs and they get this data, what are they going to do with it? Because you got volumes and volumes of task force results that have never been implemented.
Lisa Rodriguez.
I think it's hard to overstate how important those decisions from the Supreme Court were this week. Neither Kansas nor Missouri had protections in place for gay or transgender people. So that definitely makes a difference right here in Kansas and Missouri. And then the other big decision that came out this week, extending legal protections for young immigrants. I just think it's hard to overstate the importance of that this week.
Pete Mundo.
The continued pettiness of Jackson County with COVID relief money. I mean, you've got $50 million being hung up. Jackson County first said you got to apply for the money, Casey Mo. Then they said, we'll give it to you. Well, here we are about 8 weeks later. Still no money for Casey Mo. People in serious need that money. It is there. And the petty political nature of Jackson County leadership is holding it up.
And that is our week in review. Our thanks to our news reviewers tracking City Hall for KCUR News, Lisa Rodriguez. From The Call, Eric Wesson, who is now not senior writer. He is the managing editor and publisher. Congratulations on that. From your Kansas City Star, Dave Helling, and 6 to 10 weekday mornings on KCMO Talk Radio, Pete Mundo. I should point out this weekend, don't forget to honor old dad. It's Father's Day Sunday. Raise a glass, stop by to visit, make a call, or create a TikTok video to honor Pop. Some people call it the forgotten holiday. A recent survey claims we spend more than $100 on Mom, but less than $20 on Dad. Ouch! My youngest son tells me he gives me a Father's Day gift every week since the pandemic hit. He's using his nifty electric trimmers to cut my hair in the backyard, and all for free. Aren't I lucky? From all of us here at KCPT, keep calm and carry on.